Welcome to this CAD tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to model our adjustment knob. So this is our final part here. And we're going to go through modeling it all together. But before we do that, I want to quickly step you through the process, all the different operations to go from our base shape to adding some of our details, just to give you a quick sense of where we're headed in the tutorial. So I'm going to drag my rollback bar all the way up to the beginning, and it's going to gray out the things I've done in the past and start with just this first sketch. So the first thing we're going to do is draw a circle around the origin, and we're going to extrude that out a ½ inch. And then we're going to draw another sketch on the surface, which is going to include these pieces of geometry as well as another line at some point, all in the front face. And then we're going to use those that line work to make a depression that receives the bolt head and a hole that goes all the way through so the bolt slides through it. And then we're going to make a sketch out here perpendicular, which will define the diameter of the nubs that we're going to array around the edge. We'll give that an extruded thickness on both sides, a symmetrical extrude. Make it a little rounder so it's nice on our hands. Create a circular pattern of the exact same shape, so just around the center axis of our part. And then make a nice big fillet on the first body we created. Boolean or join all of those parts together, and then make us some final fillets that make this a little bit stronger. And this is the part that we're going to print. So let me get back there. So now let's model this all together. And I'm going to start off by making a completely new part studio. So I'm going to go to the bottom left of Onshape and insert new element. It's a little plus sign. I'll click that and go up to Create Part Studio. This was all in one Part Studio. And it'll make a new Part Studio. And it'll show us our 3 different planes, our top, front, and right planes. Are already visible. If they're not, you need to click them on here, but they should be. And the first thing we're going to do is make that sketch, that circle around the origin on our front plane. So I'm going to select Create New Sketch, upper left. And I need to select a plane to make my sketch on, right? I could select any one of these or even make a new sketch plane, but I want to make it on the front. And so I can look right at it, I'm going to go over to my cube and select the front face. So I'm looking straight at my front plane. And all I need is a circle here, but there's a couple different types of circles. You can do 3 points, an ellipse, but I want a center point circle. So make sure you have your center point circle selected. And we're going to hover over the origin so it'll snap to it and make that the center of our circle. And I'll click there and just draw out a circle of some size. Great. And click. Now I can type in a dimension in that box. I want this to be 1 inch, so I just hit a 1 and hit enter. And now I have a 1 inch circle, which I didn't mean to draw another one. I just wanted to pull this out so you can see that's a 1 inch diameter circle sitting here around my origin on the front plane. And that's all I need from this sketch. That's the only information I need to give it. So I'm going to click the green checkbox to get out of my sketch. Remember, you have to go into the sketch to make any edits to the information there. And when you're done, we're going to click out of it. And then I need to extrude this sketch. And let me just remind myself how long I'm doing that. So it looks like ½ inch. I'm going to go from this point here to there and make a ½ inch cylinder as my base shape. So I'm going to go find the extrude feature, which is the first thing next to sketch. We do a lot of extrudes. I'm going to select extrude. Solid will be selected, and I am making a new body. And the first thing I need to do is select which face or sketch region to extrude. I only have one so far. Pretty easy. So we'll extrude that, and it's going to come out towards us. If it's going in the opposite direction, you want to click this arrow to make it go in the opposite direction, but we just want it coming at us right now. And we're going to change that depth to 0.5, as we just looked at on the drawing. Great. So that's all we need to do to make this first initial volume, and we're going to make modifications to this as we go. So I'm going to click the green check mark and get out of editing that sketch. So the next thing I want to do is draw another sketch where we add the information of the through hole and this hexagonal depression. And we're going to do that right on the surface because I want to push that depression into it. So I'm going to create another sketch, click on my sketch, and I can select this front face to sketch on. So great, I've selected that front face. Again, I want to see it just front on. So I'm going to click front, and this way I can see my origin point because I want to be able to use this to draw the next pieces of geometry. So now I'm looking at it face on, and let's draw our circle first. So again, we still have our center point circle, and I'll still go back and do that around the origin, but it's on my sketch, so it's not exactly on the origin. And we'll click, and then I need to give it a dimension. And the dimension that I'm reading off my drawing is 0.27. And I'll hit enter, and so now I have a 0.27 circle. I also need to make that hexagonal shape, and so we want to use an inscribed polygon. So there's a circumscribed polygon and an inscribed polygon. We're going to use the inscribed polygon because that gives the correct dimension from the flat side of the bolt head to the other flat side of the bolt head. So I've selected my inscribed polygon. Again, I'm finding that center. It'll snap to the origin, so I can click and drag that out. I'm also going to follow along. I believe it's snapping to this plane, so it helps it kind of orientate things. I could do it at a weird angle to it, but I would like it to be nice and square to the world. And so that little yellow line that's shown up is showing me that it's snapping to be perpendicular to the back plane. And so I've clicked. I want 6 sides, but I could edit that by dragging my mouse around, but I want 6. So I hit the number 6 and I'm going to hit enter. But this might not be the right size yet. So I'm going to want to dimension this size after I've already said it's 6-sided. And so to dimension this, I'm going to find my dimension tool, which is here. It's a little like arrows between 2 lines. You can also get there by hitting the D key, and we do a lot of dimensioning, so I don't use a lot of hotkeys, but in this case I'm going to hit the D key and dimension the dotted line, because the dotted line is defining the diameter. And so I've selected the dotted line, and now I'm changing it to 0.45. Because that's the size a little bit bigger than my bolt head. And so let me just bring over my drawing again so we can see that 0.45. That is the distance from this surface to that surface. And the 0.275 is the circle. Great. So I have a 0.275 and a 0.45 hexagon. Cool, and that's all the information I need to give this sketch here on the surface. And so I'm going to close that sketch. And it turns light gray, but it's still visible. It shouldn't turn off, but if you ever need to turn sketches on and off, you can go to the bar on the left and turn on the eyeball or off on the eyeball. So the next thing we'd like to do is make that depression that will receive the bolt head here and the hole all the way through. So let's do the bolt head first. And so we need to make an extrusion, but it's going to be an extrusion that subtracts material, that subtracts from the volume that we've already created. And so I'm selecting extrude again, like we've used before, but instead of new or add, we want to remove it. That's the thing we're going to be doing. We want to remove some material. And then it says, oh, the faces and sketch regions that we want to extrude. I want to do the hexagonal shape and the circle. And right now it's doing a whole inch and it's going all the way out the back, but I don't want to go an inch. I only want to go 0.175, and then I hit enter. And so now it just makes a little pocket. It doesn't go all the way through, which is great. That 0.175 dimension, and I got that off my drawing. And I will hit OK, because that is all I need from that extrude feature going to that depth. But I also need to make a hole using this circle from my sketch to go all the way through. So I'm going to select extrude again, select just the circle this time, and now it's doing a new solid, but I still want to do remove, so I'm going to do remove. And it's actually inverted the direction. If it went the wrong way, you can flip it, but it'll turn red saying, I'm not doing anything right now. You probably want to make some changes. So we want to have it going out the back. And this would give us the geometry we want, but we can make it a little bit smarter and say, instead of going blindly 1 inch, we can use this drop down and say, go up to face. And so if I click on this back face of that first cylinder, it'll just go up to that face. And even if I changed the total depth of this cylinder, it's always going to go up to that face. So this makes it a nice kind of constrained parametric model. And we'll hit OK. Let me just recenter a few things. We're getting a little off here. There we go. And let me turn off that sketch. I don't want to see that anymore. Okay. All right, so now we have our extrude and our hexagonal shape to receive the bolt head and a through hole. So the next thing I want to do is make these nubs out here. And so this is going to be driven from a completely different sketch in a different plane. And so I want to draw those actually in the top view. It could also be the bottom view, but I'm going to select top. And so now I'm looking straight down at the volume, right? So it's right down here, but I want to orient it so I look right at the top. So here in the top view, first thing we want to do is make a circle over this corner. So we want to make a sketch on our top plane here. So I'm going to go to sketch, I'm going to make a new sketch, and we'll click on that plane, which will make a new sketch field here. And I'm going to zoom in so we can see what we're doing on this corner. And the feature is circular, so we're going to make our center point circle again. And I want to make it at this corner. Now, I could, or what I want to do is have it sit right on this edge. And I also want to have it be parametrically constrained. And so when I tried to click here, it didn't automatically snap to this edge because there's nothing there for it to actually snap to. And so I'm going to get out of this sketch and go make a change so that I have a piece of geometry, a construction line, but this can snap to. So I'm going to close this sketch for a second. I'm going to go back to the sketch that was on this front plane. So this is my sketch 2. And let's just look at it in the front view so we can see what we're doing. And I want to make a line that goes from the origin out to this edge so that I have an end point to snap to. So I'm going to select my line tool and draw a line from here to here. And that will snap to that edge. And click done. And I'm going to right click and say escape line so I can stop making lines. And I don't want to make a line that I might use to create geometry. I just want to make a construction line that I can reference. And so this icon here, construction, which is like a dashed line pointing at a solid line and a solid line pointing at a dash, flips construction and normal lines. So I'm going to switch that one there. So now I have a dotted line, which means it's a construction line and won't be referenced. Great, so I'm going to close that sketch after making that change. And now I have an end point out here. So when I go back into my sketch number 3, I'm double clicking to get back in. I clicked on the center of my square and I'm moving it around and now it'll snap to the end point here. So that makes it parametrically driven in the future if I want to make this cylinder longer. Remember, this sketch is just drawn on that front face. So wherever that front face is, it'll know to reference that endpoint. And at the very end, we're going to make a quick change so you can see how this all updates together. Cool. I'm also going to look at this in the top view because that's just easier to do. And I also haven't dimensioned this circle yet. I don't know what size circle this is. So I'm going to hit D, or you can use your dimension tool and select the circle. And I'm going to make it 0.4, I think is a good size. And I'm going to turn a little bit. I just want to make sure that my circle doesn't interfere with my hexagonal little pocket here. And 0.4 looks to be a good size. So I'm going to exit out of my sketch. Let's just recenter everything in the view window here so we can see things. And now we need to give this some volume. So I clicked out of my sketch, and again, we're back to our extrude feature. This time I want to make a solid piece of geometry and a new piece of geometry. I do not want to yet add or remove anything or intersect it. So we're going to make a brand new one, and we're going to select the face that we want to use. So right now it's decided that it's use its defaults, which is just 1 inch going in one direction, but I wanted to extrude on both sides of this sketch. And so instead of saying blindly up in whatever direction I'm pointing, I'm going to say make it symmetric. And now it's still 1 inch, but symmetrically around that sketch. I also want to make that not so big, and if I remember correctly, 0.15 on both sides is about a good thickness. Now you can make yours a little thicker or a little thinner. It's not really going to cause much issue. And for some reason, I thought I had new selected, but it's gone back to add, and so I'm going to make sure I really do want it to be its own piece of geometry and not yet connected to this one. So I went and changed new back from add back to new. And then we'll click OK. And now I have another cylinder over here floating on top of them. They're not yet intersected. Because before I intersect those things, I want to make some changes to this cylinder. So first I'm going to add a fillet to both of these edges just to make it a little bit nicer on my hands when we twist these knobs. So I'm going to find my fillet tool, which is up here. There's also a chamfer tool for a flat shape, but we're going to use our fillet tool to make a nice round edge. So select fillet, and I'm going to select both edges of my cylinder. Now, right now, the radius that it's trying to make in there is too big, and that's why we're seeing this red line. So I'm going to make that smaller. Let's make it 0.05 and hit enter. Great. And so now I've made a nice round fillet on both of those edges that it can do, right? If I had made it too big, it would extend farther and they would intersect and interfere, and this piece of geometry couldn't be solved, right? So that's why it shows those red lines. It's an error message. So I'm going to hit OK, and so now I have a nice kind of filleted shape here, but I don't need one, I need 6 of them going all around the edge. So I'm going to make an array of those shapes, and to do that, I'm not quite seeing the tool I want. Here it is. So circular pattern is what we want. If you've just recently opened your software, which you probably have, it usually defaults to linear pattern, but we would like to make a circular pattern. So this will create a bunch of multiple shapes or geometries around an axis. So I'll click circular pattern. First thing it wants to know here in the blue box is which entities to pattern. I want that one. And it also wants to know the axis of the pattern. So around which axes do we want to pattern. So Onshape's nice, and it'll let you select a circle because it'll assume that through the middle of that circle is your axis. So we're going to select the edge of our shape. And it'll default to 4, going 360 degrees around. And we want the 360 degrees around, but let's have a few more nubbins and make 6. Cool. So that looks good there, and we'll hit the green check mark and get out of our circular pattern. Before I join these together, I also want to put a big fillet on this edge here. So let's find our fillet tool again. Fillet, entities to fillet, this edge. That's great. I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. So I'm making it 0.22 inch radius. And the reason I'm doing that is I just want to make it big enough, and you'll see in a minute when I fillet these two forms together that they're all on one surface. So from this line to this line is one surface, and it makes our modeling a little bit easier and a little bit easier for the computer to solve. So that looks good. All right. So the next thing I want to do is boolean these all together. So I'm going to select our Boolean tool, which is this like Venn diagram icon. And we're going to make a union of a bunch of things. And so it's going to be this main part, but also all of the nubbins, and they turn blue as I select them. And now we've got all 7 of our parts in this list. And I'll hit OK. And now they're all blue, and they're all joined together into one volume. The last thing I want to do is create a nice fillet between these two surfaces. So having hard edges just isn't quite as strong. And it's also not quite as aesthetically pleasing. So I'm going to select our fillet tool again. And the entities to fillet, I want to highlight this surface. So every intersection of this surface will be filleted. So I'll select that surface, and I'm going to make a very small fillet, a 0.04, and hit OK. And so now I've made a nice small fillet in here that joins these together. Let me reorient everything, and we can zoom in. And that's all we need to do to create our part. So here's our final part design, but sometimes after we 3D print something, we realize we want to make some changes. So it's nice that we make our model parametric so that updates propagate through the different features. So let me just quickly illustrate how that works. Let's say we wanted to make this dimension larger or smaller, right? The very first extrude we did, I actually maybe wanted to be 0.75. I want to make it 3/4 inches. So I can hit that, and it'll update that first feature, but when I hit close, it'll go through and recalculate those other ones so that the nubs moved out with the cylinder. And so we can make it bigger, we can make it smaller, with small changes without having to remodel absolutely everything. All right. Well, that's the end of this CAD modeling tutorial for the adjustment knobs. So now that we're done modeling our part, we want to 3D print it. So we need to export our design in a particular file format for the software that controls our 3D printers to understand. And that file format is stereolithography, or STL. So it'll be a .stl extension on your file if you're looking at the extension. And to export a part from Onshape, we're going to go find the part over here in the parts list. It's the only part I currently have, and I'm going to right click and go to export. And it's going to bring up this dialog box with a few options. One, we can change the name, maybe make it something more descriptive. We're going to make sure STL is selected because that's the format we want, but there are other options. And that binary is selected. It should be the default, but we want binary selected for the STL format. Double check that your STL format is going to export in millimeters. So the software that we use to control our 3D printers wants millimeters. If you give it inches or feet or something else, it's going to scale it in a strange way, too big, too small. So make sure we have it in millimeters so you don't get an adjustment knob the size of a football. And we'll set the resolution to medium if it's not already. So the resolution, why it's asking this, is that when we save our design file, right now as a design file in Onshape, it has curves that are truly curves. They are round. But when an STL is created, it kind of down selects the surface and makes a bunch of small little triangles and approximates the surface. So we lose a little bit of information and it becomes a mesh of triangles creating the outside surface of our part. And this is really helpful because it makes it a smaller size and it's easier for the program that runs our 3D printers to understand, but it does lose some information. So coarse makes those fewer triangles and those triangles are bigger, and fine will have more triangles, more information, larger file sizes, but be more of a closer approximation to the actual surface. So I'm going to select medium. It's going to take it to my downloads folder and I'm going to hit OK. And it's going to give me an option to rename it again. I'm just going to say save. And Onshape wanted to update, so I said click that blue line there. And so let me just open up the knob that we just saved. So this is the actual STL file. And if you can see in there, it looks kind of faceted. You can see these sort of flat spots. And that's where there are these triangular shapes making an approximation of this nice, really smooth shape. And that's the STL file that you're going to want to bring with you when we do our 3D printing part. All right, and that's how you export your file as an STL.